Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session with the Intergroup for Subsidiarity. This session is being held at a particular moment as we have a weird governmental crisis, in fact, though there's a bit of an institutional issue. Yet, this makes this meeting, this session, all the more important. At a time of crisis, we have representatives of political parties that are now trying to make a choice and trying to find a balance between the different positions. All this shows how important it is to have a place for dialogue going beyond different currents and divisions. This is a challenge. Since the beginning of the Second Republic, we have underlined the need for two-party systems, let's say, but then different groups emerged, dividing the political spectrum into more parts. But still, we see that a common effort is needed, because this common effort can lead to an institutional construction. I would like to recall now the visit by President Napolitano some years ago, and this dialogue at the meeting with the political world has been so for all the different governments. So what are the uniting factors? Well, first of all, there is the word which is at the basis of today's dialogue, that is subsidiarity. This means that we may have different political ideologies and positions, but our country can be built bottom up. Because this is a way to fight against human, economic and social impoverishment of our country. The fact of having to do with individual subjects without using intermediate links makes it all the more difficult, even in the political world, because collaboration is needed. A subject that push forward construction together with others is needed. This is a method with which everything can be addressed. This means that everybody's effort should be emphasized in order to build something, to construct something. And this was clear, has always been clear. There is another word which can be referred to at the basis of subsidiarity, is the idea of development. That is, our country cannot just stop. It has to keep going on, to build, to work, to commit itself, because otherwise we run the risk of become a country of secondary importance and to leave the group of the most advanced countries. This is what the Intergroup for Subsidiarity has been working on for the last few years, and it has done so on the basis of some elements. The first one was discussed in Florence with the presence of Minister Bussetti this year, is the area of education. The weakness of a country may be evident when there is no education. There is lack of knowledge. 2,200,000 subjects refer to the number of people in higher education, and the rate of graduates in Italy is pretty low, but this is fundamental for equality in our country. 37% of Italian companies find it difficult to recruit people with the right skills. This was mentioned by Giuseppe Bono, the president of Fincantieri, and he mentioned that in a meeting of the Intergroup for Subsidiarity addressing these issues in Udine. So the idea of sustainable development concerns one of the areas that have been addressed, has been addressed during this meeting. And development is not just about the environment, but it is also about human beings themselves. And this refers to equity, social justice, the environment. And sustainable development consists of work, which is an urgent need for now, because this sustainable development must lead to the creation of jobs. We can't really skip this issue. And this subject was also addressed by the Intergroup for Subsidiarity this year. Some days ago, the Corriere della Sera newspaper presented a bill proposed by the Intergroup for Education, and this mentioned the notion of quality skills, that is, developing and helping small and medium companies bottom up to promote job creation. And finally, this can be done within the framework of institutional reforms that are shared. If these are not shared, as was the case over the last few years, what happens is that institutional reforms are not put forward and are just left behind. So education is an opportunity for development, for job creation, for sustainability, for institutional reforms. And why is this so topical? Because whatever solution we might find to the current crisis, sooner or later, whether we have elections or not, we have to find a solution, an answer to these problems. And without sharing, without a common position in our country, in the parliament, well, it's going to be difficult to get out of this fighting status. Whereas having a discussion, having a dialogue in democracy, a shared idea, a shared strategy is needed for objectives in the long run. Otherwise, there's going to be problems for the population. So, to this end, we have high-level experts with us today. We have Mr. Giancarlo Giorgetti, Undersecretary at the Prime Minister's Office. Please welcome Mr. Giorgetti. Then we have Mr. Graziano Delrio, who is in Rome for the talks with the government, but he will be video connected with us. Then we have Mariastella Gelmini, leader of Forza Italia at the lower chamber. Then we have Roberto Speranza, who is a MEP, Member of Parliament and the National Secretary of Articolo 1, Maurizio Lupi, President of the Parliamentary Intergroup, and Gabriele Toccafondi, who's a Member of Parliament at the Italian Parliament. So the floor goes to Mr. Graziano Delrio, who will be involved later on in all the talks that being held in these days. And thank you for being with us. And he will be speaking from Rome. Thank you. Thanks a lot. It is a great pleasure to participate in this session. But at 2, we have a meeting with the leaders of the delegations of the Democratic Party and the Five Star Movement. So I couldn't come to Rimini. So once again, thanks a lot for highlighting the work of this Intergroup for Subsidiarity. And I believe that what the President Vittadini said are right. The country right now needs to find cohesion, to find the right spirit to work together. It is not the time to foster hatred and divisions, but it is the time to listen to the others and listen to the best experiences coming from a bottom-up approach. We have discussed all the weaknesses of our country, for example, in terms of geographical layout and economic infrastructures and so on and so forth. But there is a weakness that is not mentioned very often, and it is the weakness of our civil society. We need the civil society to play a more of a protagonist role. However, many people keep mentioning that it is the state that should have a stronger and stronger role. We are in a time of fragility and weakening of relations, family relations and institutional relations. And in this context, some people tend to give more of a protagonist role to the government, but the government must be a facilitator and a regulator of the dynamics of the society. So our proposals as Intergroup are inspired by this idea. We are now making an attempt, and I emphasize that it is an attempt. Our colleague Giorgetti made a similar attempt, but without obtaining successful results. And he humbly tried to do that, and with the same humbleness, we try to understand whether there are the conditions for having an agenda for our country that can really tackle the problems of employment and unemployment. The employment has a central role and it has to be promoted as much as possible. We have the lowest employment rates in Italy, considering the European levels, and we do have the need to meet the needs of developed companies in a strong way. In our view, employment is also linked to education and to the potential and the skills of people, first and foremost. The greatest promoter of employment is men with their capacity, their ability to invent a new know-how and to invent new businesses and to establish relations with other people. In Italy, we know that is a place where people can do that quite successfully. And right now, as I said, we would like employment to be at the center of a common debate, of a shared debate, and we hope that we are going to have a positive feedback in this respect. And we would like to address the issue of minimum income, minimum salary, and also the salary equality between men and women. These must be fundamental pillars. I hope that this dialogue that is being held with the Five-Star Movement and also other representatives in the Parliament can go beyond individual ambitions. Rather, it should have the ambition to deal with the problems affecting families and companies. Certainly, this year was not successful in terms of investments and growth. It did not respond to the expectations that had been announced. I remember President Conte said that 2019 would have been a wonderful year. Well, this forecast was all the more wrong. We are all quite worried. And this worry should not stop us hoping to get new results, and with this spirit we are trying to work. I made some proposals, for example, some reforms, some measures to give support to families, and Minister Fontana and Minister Di Maio showed great interest in this respect, and I think that it is possible to work without demonizing the opponents and without thinking that what the opponents present may always be considered wrong. I don't agree with the position of Minister Salvini, but I can respect his ideas, even if it is not my idea. And everything must comply with the constitutional rules and the common rules for living together. I think this is extremely important today, and we are going to make this attempt to work together, as I said. we don't aim too high, but we know that there is an emergency that must be tackled. It's not just an economic crisis, as I said at the beginning. It is a crisis for a fragility of the whole country. Overall, it has to find a unifying spirit once again. A common effort must be made, and the hate speech that sometimes is used must be stopped. There must be encouraging discourse. We know very well our duties, and I believe that if we can work seriously and hard, whether the result can be successful or not, I think this is the method that should be used. So I really thank you so much, and I apologize because I won't be able to follow the rest of the debate, but I am very happy that once again we get to the meeting of Rimini all together to give a sign of availability and of working together despite our big differences. But dialogue is always a pleasure, and it is also a duty for those in our position. We don't have to fear our own identities. Everybody has their own identities, but these identities must be made available to create a safer and more peaceful and more fruitful condition of living together for the people living in Italy that has so much potential. So thank you once again, and I wish you all the best to you all and to all the volunteers that are working at the meeting. Thank you.
Buon pomeriggio a tutti.
Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank Giorgio Vittadini, the meeting, and Maurizio Lupi for this encounter here today in this session. Renato Farina, a friend of the meeting, in one of his many articles, underscored to what extent this year the meeting seemed to be somehow shadowed by what is happening at governmental level. Well, I do not agree with this vision, because instead I think that it is exactly during moments like this that the meeting shines even brighter than ever, because that seems to be like a sort of place where you can come and dialogue and talk to other people and exchange, so sheltered from the conflicts in Rome. So these subsidiarity intergroup is absolutely important, and we would like to underscore the key role that it plays. So thanks for keeping it alive. I think that we need to sort of get rid of the obsession with consensus in order to design a vision for this country, in order to design a future of hope and not a threatening future. That is why we need to go back to one of the main pillars of the meeting, so the importance and value of subsidiarity. So people are getting more and more selfish, and the society is always more and more fragmented. So we should go back to the title of this year's meeting, to this beautiful verse that says that our human essence is identified and is built with and through the others. So let's leave behind these shellfish trends and these atomization of society. Let's go back to dialogue with associations, trade unions, bodies representing society, keeping in mind that we express ourselves through the others in any context, the family, the schools, associations, and even in political entities. So if we were to dare and go against, the self-evident and selfish drivers, and if we open up to the other, we will certainly succeed in giving politicians and politics some credibility back. Because as Mr. Delrio said, we probably feel unsuitable for the challenges we are faced with today. But we need to keep in mind and know that a way out is possible together, staying humble, being aware of one's own limits, and being aware of the difficulty in finding solutions. There is an unbiased referee, a balanced and wise person like our President Mattarella, who fortunately is there and is trying to assess in an unbiased way and in full compliance with the Constitution and the role of political forces, the best to get out of this political crisis. What struck me of this governmental crisis is that, well, these two-pole political system relied on two opposite visions of common good, of prosperity, wealth, and growth for this country. During the debate at the Senate, I had the impression, and I don't know what's your take on that, that there were almost personal fights, and Prime Minister Conte expressed words that actually did not sound so political, but more referred to some sort of personal issues. And Vittadini talked about training, education, employment, social issues, and President Casellati, in opening the meeting, talked about natality issues for this country and the difficulty of finding the perfect work-life balance, especially for women. So again, going back to the reorganization of welfare services. So many issues have been raised, and personally, I am convinced that doing something for these issues is possible through homogeneous majorities, but before a vote. If we really want to have a consistent long-term vision, first and foremost, politicians should take a third way. So it can't be either or. To us, elections would be the best solution. But we are in a parliamentary democracy system, so it is absolutely fine and legal and legitimate to explore alternative ways, if any. But again, we need to get out of that obsession that our own identity can be defined by the number of likes on Facebook and Instagram or by an algorithm. Let's go back to a different level. Let's go back to exchange and dialogue. This dialogue and exchange does not necessarily have to be strong and harsh and violent, not at all. I'm not saying so to praise and flatter anybody, to somehow find consensus, not at all. Personally, I think that a new alliance between the Lega party and the Five-Star Movement Party, so between Salvini and Di Maio, would not be good. And also I'm quite skeptical about alternative majorities. In my opinion, we should vote. So this is my view, because we have to find a new project and vision inside the center right-wing party, and we need to find consensus there. We are aware of the mismatch between companies that ask for highly skilled technicians, they ask to fill gaps in scientific subjects, and on the other hand, schools that do their best to solve many issues and take full accountability for so many things. But I must say that where, center right wing governments govern in Italian regions, and I come from Lombardy, I must say that in spite of the mistakes, well, the direction is the right one. The subsidiarity-based method is the right one. So keeping a dialogue open with production entities, social associations, trade unions, families that are put at the very heart of the needs, because we know that the very first cell of society is the family, and I see these topics go hand in hand with center-wing parties, but unfortunately I must say that this is an inevitable effect of a majority different from the majority of the country. But if so much time that that reality just stops and finishes here, well, we think that we should ask once again the Italians what they want to do. But before asking the Italians to vote, we should have a clear vision. And Mr. Berlusconi said it yesterday to President Mattarella, well, this new political horizon should be a center-right wing horizon, because it goes without saying that this center-right wing coalition has differences in itself, of course, but there are also things that we consider as more important than others. We are in favor of Europe. We have always been. Since 2011, we have been supporters of the European Union in a convinced, enthusiastic, but also sometimes even critical way. We are aware that our way for the future is Europe, that altogether we represent the biggest and most incredible variety of religion, of approaches, mindsets, but we need to go back to that. Otherwise, Europe will look like an evil entity, far from the ideal of the founders. But again, we think that a center right-wing party should be the one that should have the task to redesign the future of this country. We are deeply convinced that we need to go back to some matter-of-fact approach, because it's not enough to win the elections. You then need to have plausible and doable programs and so on. I don't know what do you think about that, about these government challenge, but I think that the government is able to, a government of this kind, like the one that I just outlined, can take up and win that challenge. So I hope that, alchemic lab devised governments won't see the day, and that new coalitions and alliances will see the day, because they should be done before elections and not like that in a quiet, tricky way. And also I think that it is important to bring people back at the very heart of any debate. We need to start again from there. We need to understand that this is not through the universal revenue concept and project that you make Italy get out of the stagnation it has dived into. We need to foster talent, competition, and solidarity, because you tell us every day that Italy can walk on its legs. So our horizon is not degrowth. There's nothing sort of nice about it. We need to find a way for sustainable development, and this is a big challenge, but certainly there are specific elements to be considered, and these are the drivers that my party has the intention to consider. Thank you. I do also agree on the usefulness of having such a session here today, also in order to overcome the poisonous and poisoned mindset and atmosphere that unfortunately we feel every day all around us. I would like to thank Giorgio Vittadini for the great deal of work carried out in the subsidiarity sector, and I must say that we usually always start from a different starting point, and this is good. So I mean, we should not be afraid of a strong identity, because a strong identity means also having clear ideas about the kind of society we want. So exchange and discussion are always positive, and the discussion has been part and parcel of the story of this country. If I think about exchange and discussion between two giants of the history of this country, two people that seem so far away today, and think about Aldo Moro and Enrico Berlinguer, two extraordinary protagonists and figures of this time that used to start from very different starting positions, and were also able to come up with political initiatives conducive to positive repercussions for Italians. And I've been a member of parliament for the last 6 years, and I'm 40, and I must say that, in my opinion, we lack figures as prestigious as those that I mentioned. Instead, there is today a growing tendency in using commercial-like slogans. It's about continuous twittering and other sort of social media-based strategies. But again, you understand that with no discussion, with no thoughts behind any strategy, well, that turns out not to be a strategy, but just as a spitting poison out. And so I think that the work of the subsidiarity group is even more precious, especially if we talk about reforms, because we need to change about we need to reform this country, and different political forces can generate good things. It is possible. Think about the Constitution. This is a proof of that, because the Constitution was not devised by just one political party that decided to win over the other. Not at all. It was the result of a great part of the history of a country. We have just had the great anti-fascist resistance, and so there was a great deal of willingness of learning to each other and understanding one's differences. And to me, that text remains a key text. There was the Catholic and democratic culture, the Republican culture, the liberal culture, the culture of the Italian left party. I think that our Constitution is the most precious thing we have. That is why when anybody proposes to change it, I think we need to be extra careful, because the work that has led to the adoption and approval of the Constitution should not be lightly somehow debunked. I was very worried about the last constitutional referendum on December the 4th, because it seemed more like an account settlement between parties and not as a real issue. We are discussing now in the Parliament about the constitutional reform. I will tell you what I think about this crisis, and there are three small meaningful constitutional reforms. I would like, for instance, to be able to openly discuss about that with no majority constraint, leaving so the Parliament a bit more free. For instance, there is an issue at stake about reducing the number of members of Parliament, of deputies of the Parliament, and that was the opening topic yesterday for Di Maio, and I think that we need to be able to talk about this in a very calm way. Probably it could be meaningful to have so many after the Second World War. For instance, to reach Rome from Potenza, people needed at least 10 hours. So again, well, things were improved, but we could improve much more. So by reducing the number of members of Parliament without changing the election law, well, things get tricky. So personally, I think that we should think about a proportional election law that should go hand in hand with that. So when it comes to a proportional law conducive to the sharing and representation of different points of view is what we should aim at. Then we have another couple of small reforms. One about the propositional referendum. So it's about giving citizens the opportunity to express themselves on laws that then will be discussed forcefully, inevitably. Again, this is an idea that is not bad in absolute terms, but that should comply with the principles of parliamentary democracy. And then there is a third issue on which there is consensus, so that from 18 years on, people should be able to vote also for the Senate. Otherwise, for now, people can vote for that only once they turn 25. So I would like now to talk about the three reforms that I mentioned, because they change the constitution. They are very delicate, they're very important. They would change the charter left to us by our fathers, those that came after the war. But also there is another reform that may have an impact on our country and on our national community, is that of differentiated autonomy. And what do I mean by that? So far, I was sorry about the fact that it did not sound at all as a parliamentary debate, and so I'm very, very worried. I think that this is something that, if not done rigorously, but just identifying the essential performance of services, risks to become a splitting effectiveness. So we risk to create too much fragmentation, to create gaps, and really especially to provoke the isolation and marginalization and death of southern parts of Italy. So again, we need to go back to some dialogue. So dialogue between and among policy makers is key, because there should be the attempt to understand the other's words and arguments. Because of course, if I start a conversation keeping in mind that by definition my view is the right one and my opponent's view is the wrong one, well, I won't get anywhere. Well, the parliament was not designed to keep such dynamics going, not at all. It was created in order to keep discussion and exchange alive. And now let's go back to a key word that is about sort of making tricks, and I think we should reform it, so-called backroom deals. I do not think that there should be almighty people on the one hand and the bystanders on the other. Not at all. We are a parliamentary democracy. What does that mean? What does that entail? So that parliaments make governments, and somebody can say, well, this constitution is not good, I don't like it, we should change it. In some countries, in some democratic countries, citizens vote to the head of the government. But Italy is not like that. It is the parliament that makes the government. At the beginning of this mandate, Lega and the Forza movement governed for 14 months, not because they had somehow won together the elections, but just separately. And nobody talked about a backroom deal. We should say the same today, because it's very complex. Certainly, I do not take anything for granted. Personally, I think that the non-communication wall between the five-star movement and the Democratic Party should be torn down. And some years ago, there was a Secretary General of our party who was named Bersani, and at that time there was an attempt to have a dialogue. So if there is such a high number of Italians that trusted that party, we needed to bring them in the institutions, because when you have such representation out of the democratic dynamics, you need to fix it. Well, I was in favor of a possible dialogue with the Cinque Stelle party already in 2013. In 2018, I thought that we had to make a new try again. And well, at that time, my party decided differently. And Renzi on TV said, no, it's not possible. And that brought about, the Lega five-star coalition. And personally, I appreciate and respect Mr. Giancarlo Giorgetti, but my judgment is all in all negative on the whole government. But now it is up to the parliament to decide. And so if conditions were to be there, well, I think that a government could be formed. It should be a watershed, landmark government, especially on two issues. The social issue, because this is the biggest problem ever for this country. There are still too many inequalities. We need to invest more in education, in health. So public education, public health should be better and more financed. In the next few years, 45,000 GPs will retire. So anytime soon, probably, rich people will be able to heal themselves. On the non-rich people will not be able if we go on like that. And secondly, we need to have the courage to talk. Italy needs to have the courage of carrying out a green revolution. So this green conversion is absolutely needed. We are lagging too much behind, and I don't want to dwell too much. Well, we are not on Twitter, we are not on Facebook, we are not playing, so we are trying to set up a new government for this country. It is difficult, extremely difficult, and so we should pay extra care and attention to what we're doing. But also at the same time, we need to be calm. I'm not 100% sure of a positive outcome, but what I'm sure about is that it is the duty of this parliament to have a try. This is not a backroom deal. This has never been a backroom deal, and not in the beginning and not now. It is not a backroom deal, so it's worth trying. That's my message. I want to elaborate too much, but I think that our job is just the beginning. The country needs to be aware of what did not work in the last few years. This climate of hatred and violence won't lead us anywhere. So I think that we should have the courage to try sort of a third way. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. I would like to start mentioning a fact. It is clear that we are here representing different parties, different coalitions that are quite diverse, and their communicative style is quite different, evidently, and it is being all the more evident over the last few months and a few weeks. So there is an objective difference. This is a fact. However, a dialogue is possible. This is possible because both there's personal relations. I always say that Giancarlo Giorgetti, to me, is not the Undersecretary to the Presidency of the Council, and I'm not an MEP in the opposition. I've known him as a President of the Budget Committee for 5 years, and I was a young MEP, so he's a very important reference for me in the political world. But then the other aspect that unites us is the notion of the importance of politics. And this is not a banal idea, because we have sort of militant attitudes and the people that always go against politics. This is a sort of manifesto for some. And if we want to really to work on changing the number of parliamentary representatives without considering the context and without really having a real debate, well, that's not good. So there can be ideas that are opposite, but they have to be part of a dialogue. So this is the sign, this would be the sign of a possible politics. Our constitution was a kind of a compromise and not towards the lower end, but a compromise between different cultures and different opinions, but it was possible. So dialogue is really a value in politics. We want to defend the politics and common well-being, and the sense of dialogue, as I said, should get to a kind of compromise. And I'm not saying this with reference to the future new majority parties and alliances. Let's look at politics from a more general perspective, and let's think about what dialogue is. This was undermined. It used to be a standard feature which was given for granted. But dialogues cannot be taken for granted. We need places for this, and I would like to thank the meeting of Rimini because it always hosted dialogue for politics too. And the Intergroup was established for this purpose. It started again its works last year for this purpose, and a year and a half ago we had a parliament that was very much divided, and in that context more than 200 MEPs decided to be members of this Intergroup for Subsidiarity, and they worked divided into different thematic groups. Vittadini mentioned the one about education and the meeting in Florence, but that's not all. So my starting point is this: the schooling system. We've mentioned education as one of the most fundamental points for employment, and we've started considering the negative aspects, that is the emergencies in schooling. For example, Benedict XVI also mentioned that, but education does play a central role. It is objective. Just look at what the media say and what young people say. So education must be at the center within a context where there's differences, and we have to be able to manage all these differences. We've always said that the school is always a public school. It can be a state school and a private school, but the identity is the same. The role is the same. That is, it accompanies young people through their journey towards adulthood. And the differences that are there are objective differences that everybody has always acknowledged. And there will be, and I guess that there has been, many differences on how to eliminate the main obstacle to educational choices, which is the economic factor. Because today in Italy there is no real and objective freedom to choose one's educational path. We've made some progress here together. I'm not saying that my group was the group that made it possible, but how was that possible? We had positions that were totally different. Over the last few years, the majority government party and the opposition and the parliament worked a lot through compromises, and we should not be ashamed of that, because something has been done to promote freedom of educational choices. And here we see the sense of politics. Education has been considered from a variety of perspectives, and one of these perspectives concern contents. And the school is the place designed for kids, for young people. This may be taken for granted, but sometimes some people think that it is designed for something else. No, it is designed for young children, for young people, and the school must always aim at the best. And they should let students and pupils have experience, good experience. But if we limit and abolish the possibility of students to do traineeship and apprenticeships while studying, this may not be good, because some students decide to follow a certain educational path and they want to have this practical experience, so that can be a good experience for them. We want to be able to educate responsible subjects, and the school cannot be in charge of everything. That's why we mention education. Education is not just about school. There is a whole country that educates together with the families. We have this need to educate responsible subjects, and this is a fact. On the other hand, Vittadini mentioned some figures: more than 2 million needs. They don't study, they don't work, they're just there, they wait. This is really the worst result of this period of crisis, and it is really a failure for us as the educational system and as a parent, because they were not able to find what they are looking for on the basis of what they've studied. And then we have 30% of young people involved in truancy. and 14% is another percentage related to truancy in schools. In some countries, this figure is much higher, and this is a general failure indeed. So in this context, we have universities that have fewer and fewer students. We have vocational education at higher education level that are not successful, and we have companies that cannot recruit adequately prepared people. So you well understand that the bill that we presented in Parliament is there, and this concerns the non-cognitive skills, that is, relational competencies and emotional skills, and let students have experience. This is fundamental because the school is knowledge and skills. It is opening to a reality. School is education and instruction, but it's also education, so we go beyond notions. I defend the school of notions, but it's not just about that. It can't be just that. So relational skills are needed because young people must grow up, and they need notions, they need to be able to use this, the conjunctive form of the verbs, they need to be able to make calculations, and so on and so forth. A personality can grow when the skills are stimulated. I've heard this at the meeting and I was very much impressed by this. So we look at reality and we assess it. The school cannot really take a step back. But if we limit ourselves to have a school of notions, that's half of the job. And the bill that we share together and we presented aims at this. It is not about just increasing this alternating system between professional experience and education, but we want to have that and maintain that. Over the last few weeks, the political world has been quite in difficulty, and I arrived to the meeting when this session had been planned for yesterday, since I was not involved in the consultation talks with the President of the Republic. I had the chance to spend a day here and attending different sessions and visiting different exhibitions. I hope that after this session we can all go together to visit an exhibition. And there are some things that really struck me and that can be very helpful for the Intergroup and for us politicians in this particular historical moment. The first one is context. If one gets out of a context, the context then must be created by this subject. And realism, this is a context of reality which may be lost. And then for migrant people, if we begin considering the context is not banal, I'm not saying hooray for the captain, hooray for the NGOs. No, I just want to say that it is important to begin with thinking who these migrant people are. These are persons. And I was impressed by what Pope Francis said in Lesbos in 2016. They are not just numbers, they are people, faces, stories, names. So there is a question here with the gaze that may be limited, but we can't limit our gaze. And then the context, the reality, can help us doing this. It can help us having an idea, a better idea, and to think about it. The research method is normally imposed by the object and not by the subject, and the reality imposed by the subject runs the risk of being ideology. The other point I would like to mention is conscience. Everybody has their own conscience, and they respond to it in different contexts. In one of the exhibitions, here we have Ubaldo Casotto, who is one of the curators of the exhibition I'm referring to, about Abel. And in a situation without power, Abel is a greengrocer without vegetables. And in his boxes there, he was writing, "Proletarians of the world, unite." And so that's really revolutionary. And it's quite impressive. And it's a kind of way to express the voice and to express a position. Or if we consider Florence in the 15th century, the hospital for children was established, which saved and educated 500,000 children. This hospital was created by private subjects, and it was also wanted by the church in Florence. And this responded to their context, to their convictions, and to their conscience. And the last point I would like to make is about hope. And hope is really a kind of test to understand whether we are working on a certainty or a mental category on dialectics. It is the same difference that we have between August, when football teams are trying to buy and sell their players, and the league itself, the championship. There's many exchanges in this respect. And we retained one of the football players in Italy called Chiesa, which means church, and that's a sign for Italy as a Catholic country, of course. But I've read in one of the exhibitions here that we can be sure of the meaning of what we say and what we do, but we can't be sure of the result. And I want to thank the meeting in Rimini because it helps us, and it is lived and done and experienced by people who are full of hope. And these are full of hope not because they know that they will get the results they're looking for, but they're just happy of being part of this enterprise. Thank you.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning. Maybe some of you expect me to talk about the latest events, and maybe I will sort of give you hints about that. But first of all, I would like to comment upon the main topic of today's session, that is subsidiarity. And the church social doctrine gave us definitions about that. So if we still had that kind of society and structures, but the whole world has changed, and the natural community that is the point of reference has been replaced by another virtual community that forces us to see subsidiarity differently today, to adapt it to a new context. And for those of us, that work in the political sector and by definition sometimes feel separate from reality, it is very hard for us to understand what society is. Why do I say so? Well, because I think specifically about economy, politics, and society. As Toccafondi said, I've been for 10 years the president of the budget committee at lower chamber, and this time I must say that for the electoral campaign I visited companies and businesses, and during this tour I came across things that were different from what I used to talk about every day at the government or at the parliament. So I saw with my own eyes the real economy, the economy made by people working hard every day, an economy made of working relations, an economy made of so many things. For those of you who are used to talk about constraint and financial markets and minimum wage, my dear Mrs. Speranza, because I do think if we stick to this concept, we will lose, touch with those who really work hard every day in this country. And no person of all of the people that I met would ask for minimum wage. Certainly not entrepreneur, but also so many workers told me they would never ever ask for that. Let's consider today's world. No more boundaries, globalization, and these immigrants that now come here and claim equal salaries and wages. So the real equality claim of real economy clashes with the vision that we have of economy. And I think, and I say it, by admitting a fault, because I did not have such a precise idea of the real economic problems of this country before making that electoral campaign tour in the companies. So very often politicians do not know what they talk about. Secondly, let's talk about society. That sometimes you have reunions with old schoolmates, and what happens? You come across so many realities, because not all had the chance to go to university, maybe being elected as parliamentary members or other things. Again, if we still talk about subsidiarity as based on responsible individuals and families, community, the country, parish church, but what are we talking about? Well, personally, and I must say that I'm quite lucky because I live in a lucky area. Well, families, come on, let's forget it. I see just a lot of loneliness, estrangement, alienation, no reference points. So priests have been replaced by psychologists. I don't have anything against psychologists, but maybe it's one of the sort of most widespread professions today. There are also priests going to see psychologists, and maybe this is the problem. Dear Speranza, this is true. We will lack 45,000 GPs, but I don't want to sound offensive towards GPs, but who sees them? You go there just to have prescriptions, but we all tend to go to specialist doctors. So again, GPs are disappearing as well. I think that the people who are able not to remain alone and to find reference points are the luckiest ones. So those who are able to find an alive and kicking association or entity, you name it, offering him real relations. And this reality we're in here in these days in Rimini offers this kind of response, but this is not always the case, not at all. And school is a key place. Of course, 99% of the time is spent by politicians to talk about immigration and economics. But still, we should also talk about education and training. Then politics. And this is, I don't know, maybe the best or the worst. And I will also link up with the latest about our current situation. Let's talk about, politicians and the people. The people are too social, but the politicians are so far from the people. I think that this has become clear also during this governmental crisis. And I'm going to refer to what is being discussed right now, also in Rome. If the political dimension won't be somehow able to find a link with the politicians, because on the one hand we have people in the squares, so to speak, that are too irrational, too extremists in their positions, and on the other we have politicians that seem to be far away from the rest of the world and from real life. And actually intermediate role and this mediation role had been foreseen by the constitution, by political parties. So you can call them intermediate bodies, but where are they? Where is parliamentary democracy? If there are no more parties that make the connection and the link between people and politicians, this is the weakest link of these last days' negotiations. Okay, so traditional parties cannot exist any longer, this is clear. But we must have alternatives. We must find ways and places to exchange, to discuss. Where ideas are designed, visions are fostered. I don't know, where we can work on utopian projects. Otherwise, all this is not possible anywhere else. And no longer. And I must say that the state is still useful or not. I may say, no, the state, and I've always said until not long ago, the less the state, the better it is. So, according to the church social doctrine, while the state should intervene the least as possible, so the less the state, the better, to me. But the problem is, who is going to defend the people from subjects so that with no legitimation today de facto have power and can even make their own money? And again, so probably they will do what they want. So maybe the state is needed, a sovereign state, where the people is still the sovereign. But you need it there, not in the middle of society. You need it in supranational institutions and bodies, and also where the power is concentrated, because it is important to have them in such facilities and structures. Otherwise, those who never exchange, not after 1 year, after 5 years, will never ever accept the exchange. Well, a few final remarks. About what is happening these days. Oh, yes, I forgot to say something about autonomy. And you noticed rightly that Well, when Salvini won't be the Minister of Interior Affairs any longer, his consensus in the south of Italy will be lower. So this is the problem. Well, usually politicians are not so popular, especially if they are members of the government. So, and this is the problem. So, if the south of Italy want to get some autonomy again, but taking a full accountability, we won't get out of this dichotomy again. If they will be more independent, they will have to make their own choices to be more accountable without considering, some sort of vicious circles mechanism. So to me, autonomy is a key topic, a topic we believe in. So to us, the best thing would be to disseminate the principle of accountability and responsibility in an institution. As to the latest and current event, who wants to save democracy, and representative democracy should never ever somehow consider the opposition parties with any form of contempt. And I must say that what bothers me at all is that in Italy, if you choose things for consistent reasons, you are considered as a stupid person. And in a parliamentary democracy, such an attitude is a pathology, is a disease, because today, and we all know that far too well, in the parliament, what happens? Well, MPs do not discuss about large-term visions, employment, the future. It's simply about keeping that position as long as possible. And I do not like to use the word backroom deal. And it is also somehow legitimate to change one's own mind, but it's not possible to have a person who until a certain day says A and then from the next day says B, because this is not possible in a democracy. The parliament is a place of discussion of ideas. It's not where politicians try to protect themselves at all costs. That is why during these last few days, to all those who said, Salvini, the Lega made a huge mistake and so on, if after 14 months of good results, by the way, there is no methodology, because you can't spend all of your time to find compromise, well, this government won't last long. I said it from the very beginning, because really this kind of attitude doesn't lead you anywhere. Is that like being politically stupid? Probably in Italy, yes. But in my opinion, in any other country of the world, it's about telling the truth, and when you tell the truth, you can never be wrong. Well, that's sad. What's going to happen? Well, we're in a parliamentary democracy. Well, of course, we have always been different, and the five-star movement got a 33% result at the elections by campaigning mostly and essentially against the party. Now it wants to create an alliance with. So I don't know. Personally, I do think that we need a government likely to make decisions. It is absolutely paramount. We have put ourselves at stake. So if others think to be able to build up a government that makes decisions and that tries to really take care of the good of the people, this government is welcome. But let's be careful and let's not detach ourselves from the reality of the country. So I would urge and invite any politician not to somehow lose touch with reality, because I must say that some people see all this that is happening now as a sort of, specific deal for a specific purpose. So again, simply for a sort of parliamentary purpose, but it's not enough to keep a parliamentary democracy alive.
Beh, anch'io
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you all for being here at such an uncomfortable time due to the need to move our meeting, our session, due to what happened at institutional level, as you're well aware. I would like to thank all the friends that in the Intergroup for Subsidiarity have worked this year with a very serious and competent approach. You see that there's no Massimiliano Romeo with us here, but because due to his leadership position of the Lega at the higher chamber, he was quite busy, and he rightly had to stay with his family over the weekend. But I've worked with him so much and with other people that were not invited in the intergroup. I'm very grateful to all of them. I want just to mention a couple of points, and I'm not going just to summarize at the very end of the session, but I had the chance to coordinate the activities of the intergroup. And the first point I would like to raise is this: are we out of the world? Let us be serious. What we are doing here before the eyes of the public opinion and the journalists is, yes, you are full, you are out of this world. Politics, reality is something different. The parliament is something different. What are you talking about? About dialogue? What is uniting you? Look at what happened. And what most struck me, regardless of the merit, I've given my judgments, and I'm going to give some more judgments, some positive and some negative, is that 40 million people had to face last week in the higher chamber, the place that should be the top institution, a president of the council attacking his own vice president with whom he has been governing for 14 months. This is just nonsense. Regardless of who is right and who is wrong, you are here, you are looking at us, and you're hearing words like dialogue, common good, and let's work together, public, private, but what are we talking about? That's nonsense. It's not there. We don't like this. So the first thing that I believe, and I believe this because I've seen this over many years, is that there is a starting point. Giancarlo Giorgetti mentioned the changes of our society. But the starting point is this. I also invite you all to visit Havel's exhibition, and it will be in the Parliament for 15 days, provided that the Parliament is still there. well, I mean this term, the Parliament will be there forever, fortunately, but the first 15 days of October should be, the exhibition should be there. And they wanted to do the exhibition on Havel. In 1979, Havel wrote The Power Without Power in the communist Prague. He was in prison, and a man like this says, no, the strength comes from one's inner change, regardless of what the others think, regardless of what all the negative comments from the other, and nobody may follow you. You can start your change. The change in politics, the change in how politics is performed can start with you, but not changing your ideas, not changing in what you believe. Rather, the Intergroup for Subsidiarity testify to the fact that if there is no identity, there's no dialogue. If we think all the same, why should we meet and discuss? So the beautiful thing of these meetings that we had is that we have different positions. At the same time, my colleagues may be presenting different opinions, different views, and raising issues that I might not have considered. For example, how to give everybody the right to have access to healthcare services. And the citizenship income was designed for a real problem, but the answer was wrong, because dignity is obtained through a job, through having a job, and not through assistance from the government. And this is the reality mentioned by Giancarlo Giorgetti and Mariastella Gelmini. And this is the reality of those who cannot find young people or not so young people with a qualified job. We published a document with the Intergroup, and this document was published in the Corriere della Sera newspaper, and we mentioned that education is a central challenge for business. And Giancarlo Vittadini mentioned the fact that 37% of Italian companies cannot recruit qualified people. So what is the challenge in front of us? Should we keep repeating this, or should we just question ourselves and say that we can have a dialogue, we can have a debate, not looking for what unites us, but finding those things that can be a starting point to work together. So a proposal was put forward, and it was shared by everybody, all the members of the Intergroup for Subsidiarity, including some of the friends from the Five-Star Movement. So why don't we start saying that the very first resource of enterprises is human capital. It is people, not just machines. So, if there is a state, if there is a model of society that developing the economic growth of a country is a resource for everybody, then this must be pursued. Those investing in machineries and those investing in one's future and in the research must have economic advantages. So why is it so that a company investing in human capital does not have the same advantages that they have when they invest in machines? Capital 4.0 means that if I decide that I send an employee abroad, I don't have to fear that a job there is going to be lost, or that I have extra costs. I must be proud that I have invested in that, and the state must acknowledge this contribution, so I can really organize tax credit on what I'm doing. This is just an example to show you how it is possible to reach a common position from diversities and from different positions. Second example, as Gabriele said before, compromise and mediation is fundamental. It is in the art of politics, but this must not go to the lower end. And as Giancarlo said, this is evident, there's no point in hiding this. Let's say there's two political subjects. And since we have a parliamentary democracy, maybe these two political subjects did not present themselves together, in the elections, but this is a democracy, and so there is the chance to propose that, and they make an agreement. But then if this agreement changes in its nature, I give you something, if you give me something, then the common good is not there, and we have to stop because we are hurting the country, we are doing bad to the country. And saying these things doesn't mean dividing. It means that you have to understand that if your principle is the common good, then this is a guiding principle. It can show you the way. Here we have Giancarlo, and there is a bill that he proposed as Undersecretary for Sport. I say this because I know that many of you are involved in sports associations, and this was considered as the state-like realization of sport. If Giorgio Speranza did that, it would have been welcomed, but if Giorgetti did that, then it was criticized in a way, and I was a bit skeptical. The bill he proposed is in fact the evidence that the principle of subsidiarity can be pursued. What is the main resource of sports today in Italy? It consists of the tens of thousands of people, of associations that are involved in that. There are people that are not waiting for a solution from the state. They want just to be a protagonist, and they are the basis of Italian sport. And this is the cradle of future champions, because it is in the parishes, on the local clubs, that great champions may be born. So with this law, with this bill, this context could have economic advantages, and they have the right to get funding. And that's not because they have to apply for it, because they have to serve the power of the governing party, but because they are there, they exist. Well, the Intergroup for Subsidiarity said that we believe in this method, whatever the situation will be. We do not accept that the other can take decisions without considering different opinions. So the other respect must be there. It is legitimate to think in different terms and to implement different policies, and we won't give up with this method, because if we do like this, we can start changing. And Abel demonstrated this, and the strength of the meeting of Rimini is exactly this. That's evidence not of being perfect, but of a will to be protagonist, and with the certainty not of the result, as Toccafondi said, but with the certainty that what one is doing is meaningful for oneself and then for the others. My last remark concerns the situation of our government. I would like to thank President of Republic Mattarella, because yesterday he was absolutely clear and firm. He reaffirmed what is common good. We are here discussing what's going on, what happens, whether there can be a cohesive majority, whether the new government can be long-lasting or not, whether we have to set up new elections or not. Well, we're all debating this, but Mattarella said, we are a great country. And Mattarella was in the front line when there was an attempt to avoid the procedure against Italy from the European Union. He said we are a safe country, and we are a great country, and we need a certain guide. We are a parliamentary democracy. Well, I may take a different position here with reference to some people's reflections, but this is a strength. We are a parliamentary democracy, and we are a strength because of this, and not this is not a weakness, because the action of politics otherwise is always geared toward consensus. So if you get a certain amount of votes, in a certain election and then you take certain decisions, you make certain decisions and you get lower votes, well, that should not be the guiding principle, but the duty of the parliament is the government, and what the government must say is that they can do better. And Mattarella said that it is an anomaly that elections are organized before the normal deadline for the government, because otherwise weird agreements may be made. I really wanted to emphasize more my first point rather than the second, but I'm really happy with the work that we are doing. If this term continues, you will find the information about the manifesto in the Corriere della Sera newspaper article, and we also distributed copies of our manifesto. We have 3 bills that we hope this can be approved by unanimity. We hope because they were shared. That is Capital 4.0, the one about education, illustrated by Gabriele Toccafondi, and the issue of sustainability. At the meeting, there was an entire area devoted to subsidiarity, and the foundation is also working on this. This is the work awaiting us, but we do not feel like Martians. We think that change can start from here by questioning ourselves and by understanding that there's the need for signs and testimonies. There is no conflict between the elite and the population, provided that the elite doesn't pretend to teach things to the people. They rather have to show a way and stimulate the readiness to act of the people. That's what awaits us. Thank you. I would like to draw a couple of conclusions by referring to what the guest speakers said. They share the subsidiarity principle, but then they ask themselves what is the meaning of subject. So the first thing I would like to say is this: Undersecretary Giorgetti was a bit of provocative and we don't want to take it for granted that there is a subject, not just a subject of the intermediate stages, but the I itself, the first subject itself. We can't talk about subsidiarity and intermediate bodies of democracy, taking for granted that there is an I equipped with desire and self-consciousness, and without thinking that this I must be reconstructed. This is what we have tried to say during the meeting. As Caron said, the problem is the construction of the subject, not just us, but everybody must ask themselves, after 70 years of democracy, what is the human subject that take action, that educates, and that works? Educating, that is introducing to reality, according to a statement by Don Giussani, cannot be taken for granted. Sometimes people are critical about the principles and the ideas, but some people must be there with experience. Otherwise, we're talking about ideology. So our duty, first and foremost, even before the political world, is that the subject must have a general view. And this is a responsibility, because even if we think that we are right, even if we are believers, well, we might be totally wrong. Because the first duty is this common construction where at the meeting, we see it in the meeting with all the volunteers, with all the people curating the exhibitions, with all the guest speakers, and all the reasons behind these actions, because here there's a political pluralism. But behind this pluralism, there must be a reason, there must be a will. And it's interesting to see that here we have political interlocutors that are not really fighting against each other. They're just presenting different reasons in full respect. That means that there is a subject. Our main duty is this construction of subject, and this is the result of the title that we have, that we want to use not just the analysis but also the gaze. People may be surprised, may be impressed by what they see, because analysis alone do not bring hope. Analysis brings what is there, but the love for truth and astonishment is what take action in using the analysis. This is our first duty. Second duty is that the 37% that is missing, well, this cannot be taken for granted. It's not enough to fund a vocational training center. Last night, Father Badaloni mentioned that it is not enough to finance a sports center. You need a subject, a man, setting up a gym where, for example, with very limited resources can convey the passion for sport. So in the construction of this subject, you are all invited to visit Abel's exhibition. Besides a food bank, there's also some stands with vocational training centers. And you will see the full variety of races that did with Aslam, an airplane repair center, a hairdressing training course, a dairy product facility. So there's a lot of experience there. Then there's another example out of what two saints created, Paul VI and the scribe Balaver. And from their example, we have the capacity of dialogue, because this missing 37% is not due to the fact that there's nobody teaching people vocational skills. This is a problem of communication with young people. After Bono said that this was missing at the Radio 24, some emails arrived saying, well, you can go to a workshop and work as a worker if you like. You see that here what is missing is really the interest in sacrifice, the will to think. A friend of mine at the beginning of a meeting told me something. This guy was working in fridge management, and it was difficult for him to find collaborators, and through some public servants found two people. One guy from Albania that was very good, and the other one was Italian. And at the end of the first day, the mother of this guy called the manager, said, well, my son got home with his hands dirty. Well, you see that here we have an issue, we have a situation. We can't really take it for granted that there's people that can really have the will to do things and to find a job and to be serious. And this can also be applied to the political world, because for being a political party, we need an appropriate spirit, and this must be an ideal spirit, but with all the ideals, not just one ideal. Whether we have elections or not, we have to have ideals, because otherwise nihilism would mean that nobody has a position, a human position, to construct and to work. We don't want to give it up. And we don't want to accept Italy as a second-range country, because if we have a decline, there's no healthcare services, there's no welfare, there's no sport, because money must be taken from somewhere. It's not possible to provide general healthcare services if there's no resources. This is a general duty. So what has happened here, and that we wanted to continue, is that all our interlocutors are fundamental, including those who are not here and who are not interlocutors yet, because considering all these differences, we want to be in a spirit of love towards the subject. And our country must be able to dialogue, to have a dialogue with others, to remain a great country where the I counts, the subject counts. What we have seen in this meeting is that, compared to other cultures, is that every single I counts. And we want to have a country where the I is safeguarded in the same fashion. Thank you.